Hey guys, welcome back to the Curly Reader. My name's Amanda, and today I want to share with you all the books that I read in August. All right, so in the month of August, I was able to read 15 books, which I'm happy with that number. I had 7 audiobooks and 8 physical books, which is actually really good for me. Of those 15 books, 3 of them were graphic novels, and all of the graphic novels were middle grade graphic novels. I had 8 books that I owned, 7 books that I borrowed from various sources, library, Scribd, that sort of thing. I had 6 adult books, 3 YA books, and 6 middle grade books. So those are kind of the way that everything organized itself amongst my reading. But I am just going to go through the books in the order that I read them for the month. And yeah, I can't wait to get into this with you. So let's go. The first book that I finished is one that I had actually started in July, and I think I mentioned this in my July wrap-up, but I read Someone We Know by Sherry LaPena. This is a thriller. I had a goal this year to read 5 thrillers, and now I've read 1. It was good. It wasn't fantastic, but it kept me turning the pages. I read this. We ended up going on a little bit of a trip in the first week of the month, and so I read this in the car, and it kept me going. So I was really happy with that. But this is the story of a community. The back says that, I'm trying to think of like what to say and what not to say. A teenager has been sneaking into houses and getting into the owner's computers and learning their secrets. And then people start disappearing and winding up dead, and kind of, are those two things tied together? Are they not? What's going on? It gets into it. So yeah, it was good. I think I ended up giving this one 3 stars, but it was a fun, easy read, and now I'm closer to reaching that goal of 5 thrillers read this year. So, all right. After that, on vacation, I had taken some different books with me that kind of had summer vibes, or I had had the goal of reading sci-fi in August, and so different sci-fi books. And I ended up bringing Nerd Camp by Alyssa Brent Wiseman. She is the author of Length of a String that I read earlier this year and adored. And this is the story of, what are the kids? Gabe. This is the story of Gabe, who is getting a new stepbrother, and he really wants to look cool in front of him and impress him, but he's a nerd and he likes nerdy things. And so he doesn't really know how he's going to impress his cool like stepbrother, and he ends up going to nerd camp. And so he makes this list of like things that he can tell his stepbrother, but things that make those things nerdy, and kind of just the whole like point of the book is to learn to accept who you are and be proud of who you are, and don't worry about what other people are going to think of that, but just own it. And it was fun. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was a fun book, and I gave this one 3 stars as well. All right, after that, I got into my sci-fi reading, and I re-listened, this was a reread for me, to Cinder by Marissa Meyer. This is the first book of the Lunar Chronicles. There is a group of people on BookTube that are doing a Lunar Chronicles read-along, and I will link that information down below. But in August, they read Cinder. This is a sci-fi retelling of Cinderella, and I love this series. I'm so excited to be rereading it. So yeah, I can't really say a whole lot more. I will say this, kind of as a trigger warning, this does deal with a pandemic, and I know that shocked a lot of people going into it. So if that is not your thing, would not recommend, but it didn't bother me. I loved this whole series. And so for me, this was 5 stars. Objectively, I don't know, like, it holds a lot of nostalgia for me. I would say like maybe objectively it would be a 4-star book. Still highly recommend it, even if you don't really do sci-fi. I love this book. It is just so well done, and each of the books in the series like build off of each other, and it's just so good. So yeah, I give this one 5 stars because it's just one of my absolute favorites. And then the next book that I read is a new release that I was really highly anticipating, called The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams. This is set in England, and it follows a widower, an Indian widower who is just really, really grieving the loss of his wife, and he's also looking for a way to connect with his 14-year-old granddaughter. His deceased wife and his granddaughter had this really strong connection with books. They connected over books, and he just has never really been a big reader, and he just wants to connect with his granddaughter. And so he ends up going to the library, looking kind of for some recommendations, really out of his element, doesn't really know what he's looking for. He just wants to like take that first step to make those connections. And at the library, he finds a 17-year-old library employee who is not thrilled to be there, is not a huge reader herself. She just kind of did this as a summer job, and she's dealing with a lot at home. She's taking care of a debilitating, depressed mother with her brother. Her and her brother are both like taking care of her mother, who is, like I said, debilitatingly depressed. And so Mukesh, who is the widower, comes to her and is like, I want a book recommendation. And she's like, I don't have a book recommendation for you. Just pick something off the shelves, And she ends up finding in the back of a book a reading list. And it is just a list of different books. And so she ends up recommending him. The first book on the list is To Kill a Mockingbird. And she recommends that to him, and she ends up reading it as well. And so this library employee, and this older gentleman end up forming this bond over a reading list of like older class. They're not all older. Some of them are classics, some of them are modern classics. But there's just this whole reading list, and it was so good. There are trigger warnings in this one as well. So if that's something that you need, definitely look those up, because there were some moments of the book that I'm like, it got dark. And so definitely look into that if that's something that you need. But I love the message behind this book about how books are there to help us heal, and how libraries can be a community space. And it was so well done. So this one got 4 stars for me. After that, I picked up Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is another one of my sci-fi books that I read this month. You guys, I've never read Brandon Sanderson. This book was so good. I know it's gotten a lot of hype. I know that it is just one that a lot of people rave about. I made it halfway through and then ordered the second book. The third book comes out, I think, next month or the following month. It's going to be a 4-book series. It was so good. This follows Spensa, who's she lives on like a different planet. It's sci-fi, and they live underground. They're being like they have this war going on with this alien race. And in one of the huge battles, her dad was a pilot, and he was deemed a coward because in the middle of a battle, he diverted and like ran away. And so she has always kind of been tagged as a coward's daughter. But she just wants to fly a plane. She wants to be a pilot. She wants to be a fighter, And so she is constantly trying to prove herself. And so through a series of events, she ends up being able to get into the training for it. And it just follows her and her like group and what they're going through. And it's so good. It's so good. So if you're into sci-fi, even if you're not into sci-fi, I think you'll probably like this one. But definitely highly, highly recommend picking this one up. I flew through this book. I physically read this one and I flew through it, and it will probably be one of my favorites of the year because the character development in this was like, so good. So, all right. Another one that I just highly recommend. All right, next, I listened to Dark Waters by Catherine Arden. This is the 3rd book in the Small Spaces series that she is doing. It started with Small Spaces, and then Dead Voices was her second one. But the cool thing about these is that they're done seasonally. So Small Spaces was a fall thriller. So there are horror book. They are middle grade horror books, which is not really my cup of tea, but I really like Small Spaces, so I've just been continuing to read them. Small Spaces was set in the fall. Dead Voices was set in the winter, and this one is set in the spring. And this one, we follow our like core group of 3. There's these 3 kids that bond in the first book, and you follow them throughout each of the books. And on this one, they're going on a boat trip, and things start happening with the same kind of villain that we've been following along with. And it's creepy. It's definitely like It's definitely spooky. I don't think I've liked any of them quite as much as the original Small Spaces, but they're definitely fun. Quick audiobook, definitely creepy. I think I like this one a little bit more than Dead Voices. But yeah, so this one got 3 stars for me. But if you're into middle grade horror, just spooky things, looking for something spooky to read this Halloween season, I would recommend these. I think they're fantastic, and definitely start with Small Spaces because they each kind of build off of each other. All right. Next, I read The 7-Day Switch by Kelly Harms. This is another one that was on my most anticipated releases of the season, and so it's a new release. This is a Freaky Friday body swap story that follows 2 moms. One is a stay-at-home, like, Pinterest overachiever mom, and the other one is a working mom who's also an overachiever, but in a working mom form, and so one is like feeding her kid all organic and doing all the things, and the other one is just like trying to get by. She is the sole or the primary breadwinner for the family. She is trying to provide for her kids and for her husband and just all the things. And so they are next door neighbors, and they do not like each other at all. And then they end up, something happens and they body swap, and they live a week in each other's lives. And this one, I really liked some of the messages in this book, and I really, really didn't like some of the other messages. So this one was really hard for me to like nail down a rating for, because some of the things I just really was not okay with. For example, the stay-at-home mom is still breastfeeding her I think she's almost 4, the smaller one. And when they body swap, the other mom's like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. You're getting weaned. Like, now, we're done. And made that decision. And I don't know how I feel about that. Like, well, I know how I feel about that. Not a fan of someone else making that decision for a child and their mother. Another thing that I wasn't a huge fan of is one of the couples does not have a great marriage relationship. And so when they body swap, the other mom was really encouraging her to like reevaluate and, maybe start an affair or things like that. And it got really icky, and I really was just not okay with it. I wasn't okay with her making those decisions. There was also a comment in the book that I was not, I don't know, maybe I just live under my little Midwestern rock. I'm a stay-at-home mom, but there was a comment in the book that the stay-at-home mom felt guilty, like she was being a bad feminist by being a stay-at-home mom. And by the end, that's kind of resolved. I had never heard that before. And like I said, maybe I'm just living under a rock. I never contemplated the fact that I could be labeled a bad feminist because I choose to stay at home with my kids. Like some of those messages that were being relayed in the book, I just wasn't a huge fan of. But the story itself was really good, and how like when you are a working mom, you don't have to do all the things. And when you're a stay-at-home mom, you don't have to prove yourself by doing all the things, because that was kind of, what was going on. And so there was a lot of good in the book, but there were just these key things that I'm like, I don't know. So overall, I ended up giving this one 3 stars because I just couldn't decide which way I wanted to go with it. It'd probably be like a 3.5, really. But anyway, there's that one. All right, next I read a couple of middle grade graphic novels that I got from NetGalley. So the first one that I read is Living with Viola by Rosanna Fung. This one I got because it is about a girl that is dealing with anxiety, and her anxiety manifests like in almost like an imaginary friend. Like she sees this person, or whatever, like over her shoulder, that's like taunting her all the time. That's the way it's displayed in the book. And I thought that was really interesting. I have experience with anxiety. One of my kids has experience with anxiety, and so I thought that this would be a very interesting book to read. A lot of the main character's issues had to do with her Chinese heritage and the pressure that was put on her to be a certain way or to do a certain thing or to like achieve in school, and that from her parents and her parents' parents and like her extended family. And it was done really, really well. I definitely was a fan of the way that it was all handled, and I thought it was a great graphic novel for that topic. So that one I ended up giving 3 stars. I really, really enjoyed it though. Another one that I got from NetGalley, a graphic novel, middle grade graphic novel, is The Keeper of the Little Folk, and this was volume 1. I think it's called The Fairy Balm, and it's by a series of authors, like a group of people. But yeah, so this one was good as well, but it was just kind of very surface level. There wasn't a lot of depth to this one. It was cute. It was a fun, like I said, middle grade graphic novel. It's about this girl whose grandma is the keeper of the little folk, and then her grandma gets sick or she falls and gets hurt or something like that, and she's in an assisted living facility, and so she goes to visit her grandma, and her grandma's like, you need to help take care of these people, and this is where you go to like find out how to see them, and she kind of gives her all the little details about it. And so now this girl is the keeper of the little folk, and she has to help them get through some stuff, and it was fine. It was very surface level though for me. The illustrations were fun, I will say that. This one I gave 2.5 stars. It was just okay. Another middle grade graphic novel that I got from the library that's a new release, I believe this was on my most anticipated middle grade new releases, is Jukebox by Nadhi Chanani, I think is how you say your name. This one looked really cool because it is about a magical jukebox that is like a time travel thing. But this is about a girl and her cousin who, the girl's dad is super into vinyls and super into music, and then he goes missing one day. And they're trying to find him. They don't know what's going on, and the record shop he always goes to is like closed. The guy who runs it has disappeared as well. And so they end up breaking in, and they find this jukebox, and they find out that whatever record you put or vinyl that you put on the jukebox, it will transport you to when that record was released, or a time that record was playing the day it was released, or something along those lines. And so they kind of go back and forth, and it's cool because there's a playlist in the back of the book that has the list of music that they choose, and they choose music from all over, the time frame. So it's kind of cool. They're looking for her dad. This one though, the conclusion didn't really make a lot of sense. There was one part of the storyline that was just there, like, to check a box, and it like was completely irrelevant to the whole book. And that really bothered me because it had to do with LGBTQ representation. I don't mind that in books, but when it's just there to check a box, like it was literally like mentioned and it was not part of the story at all besides that. And for me, there's no point in that. If it's part of the story, if it's fundamental to the story, if it's just like a thing, if it helps define the character, fine. But it was the way that it was handled, I was super not a fan of. So that docked some points for me. It just was not great. Like the concept was phenomenal. I love the concept. The execution, for me, it got 2 stars. So those were my middle grade graphic novels that I read. And then after that, I listened to Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I got this from my sister's Audible account. She ended up getting it, and the audiobook was super well done. I will say I did not love this as much as The Martian. It did have a lot of wit and humor similar to The Martian. If you're not familiar, Andy Weir wrote The Martian, which is another sci-fi book. This is a sci-fi book. It follows our main character who basically wakes up in space, and he comes to, and he has no idea who he is, where he's at, nothing. And he has to kind of figure it out. And so you're following him in his like current state, but you're also getting flashbacks as he's starting to remember things. And so you're getting this information as he's remembering it, and also dealing with his current situation and why he is where he is and all this. Long story short, this is about a kind of last-ditch attempt to save planet Earth. Something happened, where the Earth, something was going to happen with our solar system where it was going to affect Earth and all of humanity, and something had to be done, and that's what he's doing. But you kind of figure out what that is along the way. There is a specific thing in this book that if you don't like books about this, you're not going to like this book, but I don't want to say what it is because for me, it was a spoiler, because when I found out what it was, I was like, what? You know, so I don't want to say what it is, but if you're like iffy on sci-fi and there's like certain things in sci-fi that you don't like, maybe look it up. I don't want to say, but I really enjoyed the book. But like I said, there were parts of it, the conclusion of it for me was like way too convenient. Way too convenient. But the execution of everything else I enjoyed. I didn't mind. It is very sciencey. I don't mind the sciencey stuff. I actually thoroughly enjoy it. And so for me, this was a 4.5 star, just because that ending for me, it was just so convenient. It bugged me. So anyway, I did finish that one. And then next, I finished our summer read aloud with my kids, and we finished The Candy Makers by Wendy Mass. We have been reading this all summer. It's kind of a chunkier one. You guys, I did not like this book at all. At a certain point with the kids, I was just like, I just want to read this to get done with it because I'm over it. Like, I was not enjoying it. It is about 4 kids who enter this candy making competition, and it's told in parts. So like the first part is one person's point of view. The second part is the next. Oh, hey, there's one of them. Part 3 is like the third person's point of view, but they all like start at the beginning and tell their point of view up to current. And then they start at the beginning and tell their point of view up to current. And this book was just torturous almost to get through. It was super unbelievable. It was super like just cheesy and not like there was no character development. It's a young middle grade book, and it did not do it for me or my kids at all. Like even my kids were like, it was just not believable at all. It wasn't like inventive, or it was just not for us at all. 2 stars, like barely 2 stars. I did not want, like, I got to a point where I didn't want to finish it, but my kids wanted to just like see how it wrapped up, and I just didn't even care. So that was kind of a rough one, but that got 2 stars. All right, and then I listened to Yoga Pant Nation by Lori Gelman. This is another one of my anticipated releases. I read a lot of them this month. And this is the 3rd book in the Class Mom series. So this follows Jen, I believe is her name. And her son, who is in kindergarten in the first book, is now going into 5th grade. It's their last year of elementary school. She's class mom again. She's dealing with a lot. So the thing that I like about this series is that it shows the growth of parenthood and how things change throughout. So like in the very first book of the series, her son's in kindergarten and she has 2 adult children who are like college age. And so it shows kind of how things have progressed since then. She has friends that are getting married, friends that are getting divorced. Her son is now in 5th grade. They're starting to talk about puberty and liking boys and girls and that sort of thing. And her daughters who were like college age in the first one of them now has a kid, and she's a single mom, and she's co-parenting and learning how to deal with that. Her parents are now going through like health issues, and she's juggling that. She has started a new career, and as a spin instructor, and so that's on the table. Like there's all these plates that she's juggling, and I thought it was very effective in the way that it showed how like as you get older, you're taking on different things. It's not the same, but things progress, and she still is juggling a lot. And so I thought that it was funny. I don't think any of them are quite as good for me personally as the first one. The first one for me was still like hysterical, and I loved it. The rest of them have just been good. And so yeah, this one got like a 3.5 stars for me. And then I listened to another one of my most anticipated releases. This one was a YA, and it is So Many Beginnings by Bethany C. Morrow. This is a remixed retelling of Little Women, also set during Civil War time, but it is a group of Black women that are living in not a refugee, but like a resettlement I think it's in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It's somewhere in North Carolina that they basically go, and they're talking about, the Yankee soldiers and how they're helping and what they're doing. And it was really well done. The things that I liked about this book, 1, it did not stay true to all of the storylines in Little Women, in that not all the endings were the same. Things were handled differently, but it did stay true to the characters in Little Women and who these people were and what their motivations were, and I loved that part. The other thing that was super interesting to me is the culture behind it, and the Black culture, and what was going on, and how they were handling situations, and how they were viewing situations. There's definitely dialogue in this book about white people coming in, helping, but not actually helping, and thinking they're helping, but actually being demeaning and degrading to these people and their culture and their heritage and what they're capable of. And so I really, really appreciated that that was discussed, and it was handled really, really well, in my opinion. This, like I said, it's quite a bit shorter than Little Women. And so I personally, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thought it was fun. And there are nods to like certain key events in Little Women, the ice skating, the things like that you know from Little Women, that it wasn't the exact plot, it wasn't the storyline, but there's still those little nods to certain key things. And so it was just a fun read. This one got 4 stars for me. And then the last book that I finished in August is Les Mis. I finished this one a little bit early. I wasn't scheduled to finish it until part of the way through September, and I ended up just like, I was in it, I was ready to go, and so I finished it up. I got done the last day of August, and so this chunker, check. So this one, it was good. You guys, it was so good. I will say, I listened to this, and then I also listened to the Les Mis Reading Companion podcast along with it, which helped a ton. I don't think I would have made it through this book had it not been for that podcast. That podcast was super, super helpful for me. The other thing that I did alongside of this is I watched the BBC miniseries. It's a 6-episode miniseries. You can get it on Prime Video. There is a 7-day free trial of PBS Masterpiece that you can, and it's on there. So you can watch it on there. Or it's like $6 a month or something like that to get it. Or you can get it from your library on DVD, whatever. Anyway, I watched that along with it, and that was also very true to the book until the end. The last episode, not so much. But it was really well done. And so those two things, along with listening to the book, super helpful. Helped me get through this, along with obviously the motivation of reading it with a group of people. I read this as part of the Les Mis read along that Christy Dostoevsky in Space, Naomi's Bookshelf, and the Musical Bookworm hosted. And so, yeah, the final discussion for this is on September 11th, and I can't wait. But it was everything I hoped it would be, and then some. If you're not familiar with Les Mis, highly, highly recommend the musical as well, and that BBC miniseries. They were both. So anyway, this chunker, done. In the end, I ended up giving it 4 stars just because there were definitely parts of this that I almost DNF'd it. And so I got to the end, and I'm like, I cannot in good conscience give this 5 stars because I seriously almost DNF'd it so many times because of the digressions. But it was so good, and it speaks so true through time. It doesn't matter what time you're in, where you're at, where you live. This book speaks to humanity and the struggles in humanity, and it's just so good. So recommend. So yeah, that's it. Those are the 15 books that I read this month. It was quite a reading month. I thought that I was listening to a ton of audio, but I really didn't. I like physically read a ton too, so it was good. I had a good reading month. So that's what I read. If you've read any of these, obviously I would love to hear about it down below, what your thoughts, all that. If you are now inspired to read any of these, let me know that as well. What's your favorite book that you read in August? And yeah, other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you stick around and subscribe. And until next time, see ya.